Hello, beautiful people. My name is Anthony. I am a dungeon master, and I run a D&D game every Wednesday. And it is the second session of the new arc slash restart of our campaign. I'll put a link to the first episode of this arc in the description and the annotations and all of that jazz. But I just want to jump right into it right now and pick up where we left off. So, after suffering a grueling defeat, halfway, a Pyrrhic victory, as they put it, and losing one of the members of their traveling troupe, Dylan Pickleton and Barad Zastel bury their friend, go through all of his magic shit, and take whatever's valuable. And then they decide to take a long rest. Now, their newly found Myconid friend, who is as yet to be named, watches guard for them, takes care of the perimeter, and lets them get a full, quick 8-hour long rest in. And that's good because it was like a little bit after midnight when they fought him. So they go through the long rest, nothing happens. I'd already drained some significantly, including an entire character's worth of resources. So I didn't throw anything at them during the night. So they rest completely fine. And they decide to follow the Myconid down the tunnel that it and the Umber Hulk kind of produced as they came to the surface. So they begin their travels down the tunnel, and I described it as, of course, just loose soil and stone from the boulettes carving the tunnel through. For the most part, they can make it through okay. As they start to delve deeper down, farther into the underground, they come across tunnels. The first one of which branches off towards the right-hand side, and they're worked stone. So they come across it is worked stone. Intricately carved floral patterns on the stone floor. And they see a number of statues of somewhat elf-like visages, but they have these strange tentacle protrusions coming from their chin and their face. And they pass by, and a little bit later, they come to, after a few hours more of travel, they come to another tunnel. This one is a little bit different. The worked stone floor is edged with bronze or brass. They couldn't tell. But it is less beautiful than the floral patterns carved in the stonework that they saw before, but more functional and sturdy, very well withstanding the test of time. And the tunnel is blocked off by an overlapping checkerboard almost, where every other space is empty, but they're blocks. And in these giant stone blocks is carved a face of a dwarf. Each block has a different dwarf's face on it. They pass by this tunnel, and finally Barad speaks up, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Myconid guy, do you have a name?" And the Myconid thinks for a second, and he has this habit of... Myconid are technically sexless, I think, so at least I play them off that way. So the Myconid turns its head, and a little bit of the fluid in its head cavity, basically, it's this bright blue viscous fluid, splashes out. And he telepathically tells them that if they need to address him by a name, since they do not have names, that they may call him Splash, which they thought that was pretty funny and a little, just a little nice little injection of some humor. So they call him Splash from then on out. So he tells the story of this fair race that is believed to be the progenitors of the elves, called the Great Old Ones, and they're smart and wise and just good people. But slowly they became corrupted over time, and they became tyrants and evil, and they tried to enslave the other races. And so the dwarves, who are thought to have originated on a different continent by pretty much everyone, they believe that the dwarves originated here. And the dwarves and the Great Old Ones ended up in a war against each other. The dwarves trying to stave off the tyrannical rule of the Great Old Ones, who had become obsessed with mind control and the subjugation of the other underground dwellers. So the dwarves allied themselves with a number of other underground creatures, myconids included rather, and it became pretty apparent that if the other underground dwellers didn't band together and fend off the Great Old Ones, primarily the dwarves, of course, did this, but there were some other races involved. If they didn't band together and take care of this problem, then they were in for a serious heap of trouble, which had already started to grow somewhat out of control. So they go to war, and the Myconid tells them that the dwarves won, and they banished what was left of the Great Old Ones even deeper underground. So deep that they have not been seen in a great many millennia. So after they have all this explained to them, they travel for the rest of the day, basically. A long hike down this steep incline tunnel. And eventually they come to the end of it, and Splash and his Boulette mount step over to the side and widen the hole a little bit, and they come to the end of this tunnel, and it's up in a huge cavern near the top. And looking out, they see a magnificent city, but it's not crafted with stonework or any kind of masonry or anything like that. It is made of living material. It is essentially a Myconid colony city. And since the Myconids don't have names for it, the Splash points down, and they can see from up top that there are other races in this city. Races that normally people would just kill on sight. Ogres and trolls and things like that, and orcs and etc., etc. Many monstrous races. And Splash tells them that the monstrous races, obviously he doesn't call them monstrous races, but the other races call this place Growth. And so they are welcomed to the city of Growth. And they notice, they can hear the sound of running water, and they look around and they see there's a massive waterfall that comes from high on the cavern and goes down and goes through the city and then travels up the cavern wall on the opposite side across the ceiling to feed right back into the waterfall. So it's like a filter, basically, that it just travels around the cavern through the city. And it's like trippy and weird, and Pickleton, Tom, Dylan Pickleton's player, he even said, "Oh man, we've been spending too much time around this Myconid, and spores were tripping balls," or something to that effect. But I laid out a description of this like strange alien but beautiful, crazy living city, basically. And it was probably the most descriptive I think I've ever been. And I was really proud of myself. Not to toot my own horn too much, but I was very proud of myself in that description, because for the first hour and a half of the session, it was mostly them asking questions and like me giving them exposition through the eyes of the NPC and telling them the story that they believe is their accounting of history. And it just seems, I don't know, it was really good. I was very pleased. I had a great time. My voice was killing me by the end, but it was awesome. Anyhow, they take another tunnel down, heading towards the city, because now they have to descend through another tunnel system to get down to the city's level, because they're way high up in this cavern. It's like this huge freaking cavern. They head down through this cavern system, make their way down to the city of Growth, and Splash warns them that he can't protect them if they take hostile action against races that they otherwise would be at war with on the surface world, because that's not how Growth operates. Growth is like a unified place where, sure, people butt heads, but it's not a place to bring your preconceived bullshit. And they're like, okay, we would be bad guests if we attacked our hosts and their other guests, so we won't mess around. We won't kill anybody. They head down into the city, and the first thing that happens is a giant ogre, a big ogre walks by and basically farts like right on them, which again, a nice little break from the expository dialogue and such. And then a larger Myconid, basically like Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy, if you're familiar with that, strolls over, steps up and grows and then shrinks down to their level, and spears Splash through the chest with like a root from his body, and Splashes doesn't seem alarmed or upset by this, and that seems to be how this particular Myconid converses with another Myconid. And later on, Splash tells them that this was an elder, a wise elder, basically one of the longest living fungal Myconid, or plant-based Myconid rather, that has existed. And while growth doesn't have a leader or a king or anything, they do tend to listen to the oldest ones around because they've seen some shit, obviously. Splash asks them, because they've been walking all day, Splash asks them if they need a place to stay where they'll be safe. And of course they're like, hell yeah, we need a long rest. So they make their way through the city, and Splash points to this plant structure that is growing halfway up the cavern wall and is suspended above the city, basically, but attached to the wall. And it is essentially like a large... if you were to cut a beehive in half and then take that half and put it up against a wall with the flat part pressed against the wall, but you could see all of the combs, the honeycombs from the other side, that's basically what they see. It's like this huge plant-based dorm room, and, dorm structure, I guess. There's a shitload of rooms. Anyhow, he walks them up to this vertical tunnel shaft, and there's like a plant that lives in the tunnel shaft that has like this orifice, this filament that sits at the bottom. And so Splash walks up to it first, and the thing reaches down and swallows him. And they're like, oh no, this is not good. What do we do? And then they're like, well, Splash did it. Hopefully we'll be okay too. And they walk past a couple of orcs standing outside the entrance to this little tunnel. And they don't say anything. Nothing happens. And they step into the tunnel, and then they get gobbled up by the plant too. And they get launched vertically through this plant's insides, and then it spits them out up at the top. And as soon as they get to the top, I was very pleased with Tom for this. In character, he goes, bleh, bleh, and he throws up all over the place. Dylan throws up, which I really like that. Nice little bit of flavoring. So they get up there, and Splash leads them to an empty dorm room, basically. And he tells them that the dorm room, because it is literally empty, there's nothing in there. And he tells them that the dorm room will change to suit its occupants' necessities. So Dylan, of course, is like, ooh, I think really hard about a bed appearing, and he, like, jumps, as if to jump on a bed. And he does, except the bed is made out of plant matter, so it's like roots and leaves, and it hurts. But, yeah, and so they're fascinated a little bit by the idea of a room that basically grows to suit their needs, and they joke around about it a little bit. And then Barad has a couple of hooks grow out of the wall, and he just hooks his hammock up, his little rope hammock, and sleeps like that. And Splash says he'll wait downstairs for them in hibernation mode until they're ready to go to the war front after their rest. So they take a rest, they wake up, they go back down through the plant. This time, they don't throw up, but Barad is like, oh my god, there's got to be a better way to do this. Which, again, I'm so proud of my players. And they meet up with Splash, and Splash sends his boulette away. They move towards the war front on foot. Now, this is where things get interesting. Mark, this entire time, has been sitting at the table with us, but he hasn't had a character. And given who his character is and his backstory and such, this was the best, absolute best way to introduce this character. So, they're walking through this tunnel. They make it away from the city. They're a pretty good ways away from the city at this point. And all of a sudden, through the right-hand side of the wall, this tunnel wall, it collapses, and this massive orc comes flying through the wall and slams into the wall opposite the tunnel. He shakes the dirt and dust off of him, gives a snort, and then shouts an orcish battle cry. And I describe to them what they see. They see this massive, 7 foot tall, he's a half orc, but he looks so orcish that I just say he's an orc. And he's got the bottom jaw of his bottom jaw is painted like blood red. He's wearing like a humanoid skull of a Goliath on his left shoulder as like a piece of armor, an accent to his armor. And he's got a breastplate on, and he's got this massive two-handed maul, and the head of the maul is a crystallized, dried out eyeball. Like a big crystallized, dried out eyeball. And the like trail, I don't know, tendons, I guess, that would run out of the back of the eyeball, wrap around to form the head of this maul. It looks awesome. So they're like, oh shit, this dude's like big and scary and formidable. And he lets out an orcish war cry, and he just charges right back through the hole and starts fighting. And they peek in and they see this giant, grotesque, ugly creature, which is a Fomorian. And they see that this orcish gentleman appears to be doing battle with the Fomorian. There's another person, a human monk, also doing battle with him, and they can see that there's a dwarf on the wall, pinned by a stalactite, and definitely probably dead. Like, literally speared through the chest with a stalactite. And so I shift the narrative a little bit, right? So that's what the primary, air quotes, group sees. And then I just look right at Mark, and I'm like, Eratir, your dwarven cleric companion has been killed. You just watched as the Fomorian reached up to the ceiling, snapped off a stalactite, and backhanded your dwarven companion, and then speared him through the chest as he bounced off the wall. He is most certainly dead. And when I said that, it was like the look on his face was like a switch had been flipped. He was instantly into it. And everybody else was like, oh shit. And I was like, it's just you and your monk companion now. It was awesome. The Tom and Dan, immediately they jumped in. So they're here to do a job, and this guy also seems to be doing that job. They just join in and start helping him out. Now, the Fomorian was a relatively easy encounter for them, actually. I was expecting it to be slightly more difficult. They did take a good little bit of burst damage, but they killed it, I think, in 3 rounds. I'm not sure. But they did do a pretty significant amount of burst damage. They focused it down hard, and I was really, really pleased with them as far as that's concerned. They beat the crap out of this Fomorian, and then they basically do their introductions with Eratir, right? Barad and Dylan move forward into the cave to introduce themselves, but Eratir, dude, Mark was, I was so happy with him. He crushed it. He walks up to them, and because Dylan is a bard, he didn't ever draw a weapon. And Eratir, the Blazemaw, that whole tribe, they're all about getting your hands dirty and fucking shit up. And their primary driving function is that if you're not fighting, you're not alive. That's basically them in a nutshell, if I had to boil it down. Anyhow, he walks forward and he sees that Dylan hasn't drawn a weapon. He asks me to describe their characters, and I have them describe themselves. And he looks at Barad, who has his longbow out, and very obviously he shot a few arrows into the Fomorian, and it was very obvious that he assisted. And he he turns to Barad, and he says, in this real deep, gravelly, badass orc voice, man, I'm in love with this character. And he says, I see you let your women do the fighting with you, or something to that effect, right? He put Tom right on the defensive, right out of the gate, and it was awesome. And so they had I sat there for maybe 5-10 minutes, where all 3 of them just talked to each other. So they talked to each other for about 10 minutes, and I was so happy, super pleased. And eventually, they take care of the cleric, and they say some words over him, and Barad ironically finds out that he was a cleric dedicated to a goddess of luck and travel, and that was a pretty good little chuckle that we had there. And then they decide to, since there was a Fomorian in this cave, and technically this cave, this tunnel, is behind Allied lines. So they're worried that, especially Splash, is worried that any other undead can come out from this tunnel and flank the Allied forces, and it would just devastate the war front, and growth would most certainly end up being overrun without a strong war front to protect them. They say, shit, okay, let's scout out the rest of this tunnel. So they do. They head further down the tunnel. They try to be stealthy, but they're all horrible at it. So, not that it matters, though, and you'll see why here in a second. They creep up to this tunnel, and through this tunnel, and they see that a part of it branches off to the right, and then it continues going straight forward. So they decide to peek into the right-hand side, and they can see two large silhouettes of what looks to be two more Fomorians. And again, super proud of my players. They spent some time discussing how they would like to deal with this. I made sure to tell them that the entrance to this room is smaller than the both tunnels, so that they would probably only be able to come through one at a time, and they'd have to crouch down and be somewhat vulnerable to get through. So they come up with the plan, and Barad says, I'm going to go in there, use my longbow, shoot one of the Fomorians in the back, force him to come at us through this bottleneck, and we'll chop him up as he comes through. And then we'll deal with the other one afterwards. Everybody's on board. Everybody gets ready. Barad goes in there, rolls a really shitty stealth check, kicks a rock into a bunch of other rocks, makes a shitload of noise, freezes. Nothing seems to happen, but he does notice that the Fomorian is like swaying slightly. He moves in, draws his longbow, shoots the Fomorian in the back. The Fomorian continues to sway a little bit, but doesn't turn around or move or care. And they had a conversation with Splash where Splash said, hey, undead can kind of go into an inactive zone if nothing is happening around them. They'll just kind of stand there and sway in an inactive state until something gets their attention. So Barad says, okay, I don't know what the fucking deal is, but I guess I'll just keep shooting this guy until he figures out that I'm here. He shoots him a couple more times with arrows. I tell him that the Fomorian sways back and forth a little bit, but nothing. Then he tries to do Firebolt a couple of times. And he has this really cool thing that he does where he basically casts spells from the point of an arrow on his bow. So, like, if he were to cast Firebolt, he would draw his bow back as if he were shooting an arrow of fire. And he does the same thing with Magic Missile. It's very cool. I really like it. Anyway, so he shoots the Firebolt into the back of the Fomorian, and it lights up the area a little bit, and I have him make a perception check, but he flubs it so hard. So I gave it to him anyways, basically. He fires two Firebolts, and I tell him that he can see kind of like a large chain above the Fomorian going all the way up to the ceiling, like a big-ass fucking chain. And he's like, huh, interesting. He waves the rest of the party forwards, because he's a human, so he doesn't have dark vision. So he waves the rest of the party forwards. They come in, the tiefling and the half-orc have dark vision, so they can see that the large chain is attached to a massive hook, which is punched through the chest of the Fomorian, and that's why it's swaying, because it was up off the ground a little bit, and he was providing a little tiny bits of nudging momentum to make the Fomorian sway back and forth. And they see that there's another Fomorian who had stepped on basically what is a version of the punji trap, which is when you step on it, an arm comes up with a bunch of spikes and impales you in the chest and kills you. But that Fomorian is still alive, but it's impaled on this trap, and it can't get away. They move up a little bit closer, they deal with the other Fomorian, and they're like, why were these two guys here, and why did these traps kill them? And they're like, well, it's metal, dwarves work with metal. And then they start to inspect the area, and they notice that the stonework has the floral patterns that they saw earlier. And they were like, nope, we're not doing this. Let's get out of here. This is not what we signed up for. We're not investigating some crazy ruins of an ancient civilization of what they pretty much know, but my players are very good about not mixing meta knowledge and stuff, so they call them the Great Old Ones instead of Mind Flayers or Illithid or what have you. So Then I describe to them what they see when they look past the Fomorians, which is that there's a small door, a doorway, and there's a circular stone set in the doorway that rolls to close it. And it's like a flat circular stone that rolls on its edge, open and close, to seal and unseal the entryway. Now, I tell them that it's open and there's a crowbar in between two of the blocks of stone on the floor and the circle, keeping it propped open. They look through there, they see that there's a number of undead corpses on the ground. It looks as if something was chasing whomever was trying to get in this tomb, and they went into this, well, I guess it's not a tomb, ruins. I keep wanting to say tomb, but it's ruins. Someone was chasing, these undead were chasing this creature or person or what have you, and they fled into this tomb. I said it again, ruins. They were doing basically a fighting retreat. So they're curious because they think that if there's injured, they can help them, and they decide to go in because they could find allies. Aratir even says, more fighters for the war band, and suggests that they go in, and that's where I called the session. And it was awesome. I was riding high on so much freaking, it was awesome. I had a great night. I felt like everything went awesomely. I got to flex my improv muscles super hardcore. I am not going to say what I improved because my players are absolutely going to listen to this. Suffice to say, I got to use muscles that I do not get to use very often, and it was awesome. And all in all, I felt like it was one of those sessions that you have once in a really long time where you just go 10 out of 10, everything was awesome. Now, my players might disagree with me on that, but I loved it. Anyhow, that is our second episode. It was awesome. Had a great time. Had to take a week off between the first and the second, so this week we'll be playing our third. Today is Monday when I'm recording this, so in 2 days we'll have played our third session, and we'll see where it goes. They'll be delving into the ruins of the Great Old One's empire. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Don't be a dick, and I will see you next session.